welcome back to the Classics Capsule with me, Sean McKiernan, and today we're going to continue a look at the classic television programme Doctor Who. The last time the good Doctor was in the capsule, we covered from the show's beginnings right the way through to the end of the 1960s. By which point in 1969 Doctor Who was as good as dead. Its viewing figures had plummeted to just over 3 million, and the BBC were actively looking for a replacement for the programme, and as such the last episode of the 1969 series revealed that the Doctor was an alien from a species called the Time Lords, and the original plan was that the character was going to be returned home and that was the end of it. However, the BBC were unable to come up with a replacement programme for Doctor Who, so it was recommissioned for another year. So the ending of the series in 1969 was amended to the Doctor being exiled to Earth. And as the programme star, Patrick Troughton, had decided that it was time for him to leave the show, a new Doctor was immediately sought. The BBC's original choice was Ron Moody, who turned the part down flat, a decision he would later regret bitterly. Fate then took a hand in the BBC had a radio comedy programme called The Navy Lark, and one of the stars of the Navy Lark was an actor named John Pertwee. And another one of the actors in the Navy Lark, an actor named Tenny 11, suggested to Pertwee that he should put himself forward as Troughton's replacement. To begin with, Pertwee thought it was an absolutely absurd idea, but when he thought about it, he came round to the conclusion that, yeah, it might be worth a phone call, so he contacted his agent, who initially thought it was an absurd idea, but decided it was worth a phone call. And so Pertwee's agent contacted the BBC and got through to the Doctor Who production office and asked could he put one of his clients forward to be the next Doctor Who. My client's name is John Pertwee, and he was met with an amazed silence at the end of the phone because Pertwee's name was second on the BBC's list, and the production team were in the process of gearing up to approach Pertwee to offer him the role anyway. With the interest declared on both sides, it became quite an easy process for Pertwee to be persuaded to actually take the role on. And so 10 days after Troughton's final episode had been broadcast, it was announced that the next Doctor Who would be John Pertwee in a very, very different take on the programme. The previous 6 years, it had been very much a science fiction programme where the Doctor and companions would arrive on a planet or a period of Earth's history and would overcome some sort of alien menace. The format was altered to the point where it became more of a cross between the Avengers and Quatermass, where the Doctor would be exiled to Earth. He would be allied to a military organisation called UNIT, which was introduced during the Troughton years as a trial run, really, to see if this concept would work. And as such, one of the most endearing and enduring characters in Doctor Who was brought back to head the UNIT organisation again, Brigadier Alistair Lethbridge-Stewart, brilliantly portrayed right the way through the characters run by Nicholas Courtney. The really bizarre thing is that Courtney wasn't the first choice to play Lethbridge-Stewart. That was David Langton, who originally agreed to play it and then dropped out of the serial that Lethbridge-Stewart was introduced in. And Nicholas Courtney was immediately offered a promotion. He was down to play a captain in the story called The Web of Fear. And when Langton dropped out, Courtney was offered a promotion to Colonel, as the character was when he was first introduced. A wonderful stroke of luck for Nicholas Courtney, which saw him become a series regular at least for 1 year. Rounding the regular cast off for the new look Doctor Who was a very different companion. She wasn't really a companion, she was an assistant in every which way. The character was named Liz Shaw. And Liz Shaw was a multi-qualified scientist. Again, wonderfully played by an actress named Caroline John. And that was the format. The Brigadier, the Doctor and Liz. They were the three central characters. The series, when it was due to return in 1970, would be in colour for the first time. And it was decided by the show's new producer, Derek Sherwin, who'd just been promoted from script editor, that the show would be considerably more adult in tone as well. It wasn't going to be a children's programme anymore. It was going to really go for it, if you like, and be very much along the lines of Quatermass. The initial disputes with Pertwee were that the BBC initially wanted him to be even more comic than Patrick Troughton had been. Pertwee, being a typical actor, having done comedy for the vast majority of his career, was desperate to do something dramatic and to show that he was capable of doing something in a dramatic way. He wanted to do it absolutely dead straight. As a result of which, this first serial, it's
first serial.
As a result of which, his first serial, it's very much tongue-in-cheek as performance. There's no other way to describe it. He is sort of comic in it, but in a very serious manner. His first serial hit problems very unexpectedly, which wasn't exactly strange with Doctor Who. It had a fairly chaotic life up to this point. The BBC went on strike, and as such, it was originally planned that his first 4 episodes were going to be done in the traditional way of location work done on film, and then studio work done on electronic videotape in the BBC's television studios. That proved to be impossible because of the BBC strike. And so Derek Sherwin decided, rather than to abandon the thing or put the production back, he would shoot the 4 episodes entirely on film on BBC premises. This suited John Pertwee because he hadn't done that much television work as such, and he was very nervous about working in television studios. He'd done a huge amount of film. So he was a lot more relaxed making his first serial entirely on film. During the course of the production, Derek Sherwin was moved off Doctor Who to be an associate producer on a series called Paul Temple, which his predecessor as Doctor Who's producer had already moved on to. And his replacement as producer was a former actor and current director named Barry Letts, who had already directed for Doctor Who, and he had a real affinity with the programme. He was also very much a fan of the technology side of the effects. He agreed with Pertwee that the Third Doctor should not be comic in any way, shape or form. It should be absolutely dead straight. He agreed with Derek Sherwin that the programme should be considerably more adult than it had been in the 60s, and as such, the first 4 episodes, entitled Spearhead from Space, contain one of the greatest invasion sequences seen in Doctor Who, when the principal monsters, the Autons, as shop window dummies, come to life and smash their way out of shop windows and then quite merrily mow down people in the street. Nothing had been seen like this in Doctor Who before, and certainly nothing on British television at 5:25 in the evening. It drew complaints, which the BBC were concerned about, but they were also absolutely delighted with the fact that the viewing figures trebled to just on 9 million by the end of the serial's run. Pertwee's second serial went back to the traditional way of location work on film and television studio, and Pertwee then, now feeling confident in the role, began to make his presence felt in wanting it to be as realistic as possible. A lot of the serial is set in caves, and there is a sequence towards the end of the first episode where the Doctor and Liz Shaw go potholing to identify the threat in these caves. And the costume designer, the director and the producer all wanted Caroline John to do this potholing sequence in a mini dress. Pertwee displayed a show of temper about this, in that it was completely ridiculous, because you would not go potholing in a mini dress, you would wear a boiler suit. Caroline John had wanted to wear a boiler suit and had been overruled, and Pertwee refused to do the sequence himself unless she was allowed to wear an outfit that actually befitted the sequence that she was doing. He took umbrage with Nicholas Courtney's unit out costume because he felt the boots weren't realistic. No military man would wear boots in the style of that costume. So he insisted that the boots be changed. The interesting thing about this particular serial is one of the guest stars in it was Fulton Mackay. We'll come back to him in a while. The story featured a race of reptiles, intelligent reptiles who had ruled the Earth billions of years before man evolved, and now wanted the planet back. It was a very neat take on the criticism that one of the writers, that Terence Dix, the new script editor for the series, approached. And when he told them about this new format about the Doctor being exiled to Earth, Dix was told, "You've now got two Doctor Who stories, Mad Scientist and Invasion from Space." This was a neat twist on that, in that the invaders, if you like, were man, who had evolved and had taken over the planet while this race of reptiles were in hibernation, and had stayed in hibernation for billions of years, and had then been revived, or one colony of them had been revived and decided they wanted the planet back. It ends in a moral dilemma where the Doctor wants to make peace with this reptile race, and Lethbridge Stewart, being a military man behind the Doctor's back, destroys them and blows them up at the end of it. And it features the first take on Barry Letz's editorial direction of the show, when he changed the Doctor's final line, when he says quite bluntly, "That's murder." Very much open to debate if it is or it isn't. Yeah. Pertwee's first serial ended with a stable of science fiction stories, The Parallel World. And it features a story where, to find a new source of energy, a scientist is drilling into the Earth's core to release the energies that are contained there. The Doctor realises the threat of this, and realises that if you actually do this, you will completely destroy the planet. But in his attempt to get the TARDIS console working again so he can break his exile, he is slipped sideways onto a parallel version of the Earth, where the same project is taking place, but where there is a fascist government because the Nazis won the war. And rather than it being a scientific project, it is a scientific labour camp. The Doctor, of course, isn't recognised by anybody because all the characters are duplicated, but they're all duplicated as fascist versions of themselves, and he has no existence in this parallel world. It's quite a neat way of telling the exact same story twice and spreading it over 7 episodes. The end of the 6th episode features a wonderful sequence where the parallel Earth is destroyed, and it finishes with an absolutely incredible shot with all of the characters looking at a wall of lava advancing towards them, and it's a special effect that, believe it or not, for 70s Doctor Who actually works and is actually believable and is genuinely unsettling. The entire story is genuinely unsettling. The series finishes. Everybody was happy. Doctor Who had had another year. And then very unexpectedly, the BBC recommissioned it because it had done far better in the viewing figures than anybody anticipated. The problem was that John Pertwee had only signed a contract for 1 year. And so Barry Letts went to him and said, good news, we've been recommissioned and the BBC are happy to go along with it for a couple of years. I would like you to sign a contract to commit yourself for 3 years, and Pertwee refused point blank to do so. He preferred to work on the series on a year-by-year basis, which he agreed that he would give the BBC at least a year's notice when he decided it was time for him to depart the programme. And so Barry Letts, while he wasn't entirely happy that he was going to have to work on this agreement, he at least had an agreement that he had a star in place, even though it was only on a year-by-year basis. He then made the decision that the character of Liz Shaw had to be written out. He saw the character of the assistant stroke companion as being the audience and someone being there for the Doctor to explain things to, which, if he's being assisted by a fully qualified scientist, he wouldn't be able to do that. Caroline John, as it turns out, was actually pregnant by the time the second John Pertwee season would have been filmed and would have been unavailable to do it anyway. So a new character was created named Josephine Grant, and was played quite superbly again by an actress named Katie Manning. To further the sort of family feel of the programme, it was decided that the Brigadier would have a regular captain rather than guest stars coming in. One of whom, funnily enough, in the first series had been played by a young Paul Darrow, who of course went on to great fame as Kurt Avon in Blake 7 later on in the 70s. The character of Captain Mike Yates was created and was cast by an actor being brought in named Richard Franklin. And it was then decided that they needed a new regular villain, as it was considered that the relationship between the Doctor and the Brigadier was like Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. And so they needed a Moriarty figure. And so they created this character, Barry Letts and Terence Dicks, of this renegade Time Lord, who, very, very skilled hypnotist, but who was basically a psychopath. The next morning, Terence Dicks came in and said, I've got the perfect name for this character, we're going to call him the Master. And Barry Letts said, I've got the perfect actor to play him. And the actor who Barry Letts had in mind to give him his full name was Roger Cesar Marius Bernard de Delgado Torres Castillo Roberto, fortunately known as Roger Delgado. Delgado was of a parentage of a Belgian mother and a Spanish father. And believe it or not, even despite that and despite his name, he was actually a true Cockney. He was born in Whitechapel. And he was brought up in Whitechapel as well, in London's East End. He was a very, very close friend of John Pertwee and had been for many years before he was asked to take this character on. And when it was described to him, he jumped at the chance. Barry Letts adopted the policy of each season would begin with a gimmick. And not content with introducing a new companion, a new regular captain and a new Time Lord, he decided to use, once again, the Autons. The writer of the Autons' previous serial, the writer named Robert Holmes, was invited back to write the first serial for the Master. And to say he got the BBC in an awful lot of trouble is putting it mildly. At this particular point in time, this was like 1970, early 1971, there was this strange craze in Britain of plastic furniture, where an armchair, you could buy armchairs made out of hard plastic. And they were very practical, but they were also absolutely hideous as anything. They were all kinds of bright colours like orange, yellow and everything. The Autons, of course, have an ability to make plastic come to life. And as these chairs were in everybody's home, Robert Holmes had the approach of, let's take the everyday object and make it absolutely terrifying. And so he wrote into this serial one of these plastic chairs which came to life and smothered people when they were sat on it. Which, just to make it even worse, was then actually filmed in a fairly graphic close-up of the plastic actually forcing itself over somebody's face. Another craze at the time was soap powder would have cartons on, or coupons on the back of it, and you could send off and get plastic flowers sent to you. And so there is a sequence where the Autons in these huge, great big grotesque carnival heads are going around handing out plastic daffodils, which then spray a plastic film over people's mouths and suffocate them. Add to that a plastic troll doll which the master creates, which comes to life and strangles somebody. And you have got a recipe for serious trouble, which is precisely what happened when the serial was broadcast. And the level of complaints was such that children were terrified to go to bed with the teddy bears because they were absolutely petrified that they would come to life during the night, grow fangs and strangle them. Parliament wrote to the BBC asking them, but not so much asking them, but basically demanding that Doctor Who be toned down because this was going way too far. Barry Letts was given a serious kicking about it, and he realised, yeah, we went way too far with this serial, we'll pull it back. Which they did up to a point. It didn't really ever lose the controversy. Although, as this particular series went on, the controversy became quite strange in that the final story was set around black magic and featured the Master as a vicar in a church where he was also the leader of a black magic coven conjuring up what people believe to be the devil. It's actually an alien from another world, Azal the demon. At the end of the story, when Azal is destroyed, the church blows up, and it was done in such a realistic manner that people genuinely believed that the BBC had blown up a church. It was actually a model. But the BBC received hundreds of complaints from people demanding what right they thought they had blowing up a church in the name of entertainment. Barry Letts took that as a major compliment because it showed that the approach that they had of taking far more time over the effects, and also the advent of using blue screen, the process the BBC called colour separation overlay, to basically have a model set and then be able to put actors onto this, released a lot of money for the visual effects team to create better looking models and to be able to destroy them in a more realistic manner than they'd ever been able to do before. The downside, of course, with the blue screen in its early days, especially for Doctor Who, was it needed a lot of time to do it, which, in all fairness to Doctor Who, it didn't have that time. And as a result, an awful lot of the effects had this horrible blue fringe around characters or objects. They just didn't have the time to do it. The thought was that if they changed the colour, they'd get better results, and so rather than use blue, they used yellow, which made the problem even worse. However, it was very much in its early days and it was all very experimental, and season 8 of Doctor Who was another massive success, apart from the fact that Roger Delgado was not getting the level of work that he had done before. He'd appeared in all 5 of the stories, and casting directors had thought that he was now a regular in Doctor Who, which wasn't actually the case. So he spoke to Barry Letts and explained to him that, like, he, as much as he loved being a master, he really needed to leave. And so a plan was hatched where they would draw back the Master's involvement in any subsequent series and would write him out in a huge blaze of glory when John Pertwee decided to leave the series. Delgado was all for this. And so in season 9, which opens with the return of the Daleks for the first time since 1967, when Terry Nation had withdrawn the BBC's rights to use them, trying to launch them in their own series in America, which didn't work. So he decided to jump on the Doctor Who gravy train again and allowed the BBC to use them. The only downside, of course, was that the BBC only had 3 Dalek props in usable condition. And the really sad thing is, the way Day of the Daleks is filmed, it's quite obvious there's only 3 Daleks ruling the whole of the planet. You know, and then they subsequently sort of come back from the future to try to invade present day Earth, and it's even more obvious that there's only 3 Daleks trying to invade modern day Earth. The Master returned twice this particular series. The first time in a story called The Sea Devils, which was a sequel to the original story from Pertwee's first series of intelligent reptiles. This time a colony of cousins from the original reptile race from under the sea. And in order to make the story, the BBC approached the Royal Navy and asked could they assist, and the Royal Navy, seeing this as a major PR coup, were all for it, and gave the Doctor Who team access to a destroyer, to a diving ship, all kinds of things. They gave them free, unrestricted access to a naval base in Portsmouth. And so, John Pertwee, being a Navy man himself during the war, he was absolutely in his element. Barry Letts had been in the Navy during the war, he was in his element. The very strange problem that the programme created for itself with this story came after it had been made and while it was being broadcast. There's a sequence where the Royal Navy sends a submarine to investigate what is actually going on with these strange reptiles. And to save money, the BBC went to the local Woolworths store and bought an Airfix model of a submarine, which when they built it decided it didn't look visual enough. So they went back to Woolworths and they bought a fan for a vacuum cleaner and stuck it on the back of this submarine. And then as the submarine is being moved along, for shots of it apparently sailing underwater, this fan would rotate. Looked absolutely wonderful, looked very realistic. The Monday morning after the episode was broadcast, Barry Letts arrived at the BBC studios and was greeted by the Special Branch, who had been sent there by the Ministry of Defence to find out where the leak had come from, because they'd managed completely unwittingly to reveal the plans for a new top-secret nuclear submarine, which in those days the operating frequency for the submarines was shown by the number of blades on the rudders on the back of the propellers on the back of the submarines. And by total fluke, the fan on the back of this model was the exact same number of blades on the British nuclear submarine fleet. And so, completely unwittingly, Doctor Who had very nearly rendered the entire Navy fleet completely unworkable. They managed to convince the Special Branch officers that, like, look, this is what happened. They had to show them the receipts from the Airfix model and the extractor fan and whatever else, but there you go. Season 9 finished with a trip to Atlantis. As to how the TARDIS is able to work is anyone's guess. It's never actually explained how the Doctor is able to flip nearly 3,000 years back in time in a fully operational TARDIS again without any great assistance. But it features a story that the Doctor tells of a mentor he had when he was a young boy on his home planet. And it's just this nice little throwaway scene which you sort of think, yeah, it's just like a nice way of the Doctor comforting his assistant. As per usual, they've been locked up in jail in Atlantis. It's something that's returned to later on in quite tragic circumstances, actually, which we'll go into in a few moments. The following year, season the 10th year of Doctor Who, again Barry Letts wanted a gimmick, and as it was the 10th anniversary of Doctor Who, the gimmick he came up with was to have all 3 Doctors together. Now, all I'll say at this point is he managed to do it, but there were major problems with this story, and the multi-Doctor anniversary stories will be looked at in a separate edition of the capsule by themselves. They're far too complicated to be looked at in a sort of overview of the years as such. Special mention for this series has to go to the following story. At the end of the anniversary special, the Doctor is granted his freedom to travel in time and space again. The TARDIS has returned to full working order. And the first story where he goes off is called Carnival of Monsters. And the story behind it, Robert Holmes again was brought in and asked to write a cheap story because the budgets were very, very tight. Barry Letts was continually being hauled over the coals because he would overspend regularly each year, and it was always by the exact same amount that he'd overspend by. And so he decided this year he was going to be a good boy, and so they asked Robert Holmes, could you write us a cheap story? Robert Holmes went away and wrote these 4 episodes, and when he delivered them, Barry Letts and Terence Dix read them and thought, these are so good, we've got to do them the way he's written them, even though it's going to cost an absolute fortune to do it. We've got to do it, we can't cut it, we can't change it. Barry Letts elected to direct this story as well as produce it, as his contract allowed him to do. And amongst its guest cast was Tenny Elevens, who of course was the actor in the Navy Lark who had suggested to John Pertwee he would be the ideal Doctor Who to take over from Patrick Troughton. It's about a machine which can store alien life forms in miniaturised forms and have them repeat the same actions over and over again for the enjoyment of other alien species who would watch this on a screen on this thing. And somehow or other, the TARDIS is caught in its field. And so the Doctor and Jo Grant arrive at what they think is a ship on the Indian Ocean, when in actual fact they're in this machine. The first episode finishes with this incredible sequence where the roof of the ship's hold opens and a gigantic hand comes down and picks up the TARDIS while John Pertwee and Katie Manning are stood there right next to it. It's incredibly ambitious, and it's incredible because it actually works. It's genuinely believable that this has actually happened. The second episode sees them actually get off the ship but into the workings of this machine, and there's all kinds of things where a giant screwdriver comes down and tries to stab them, again done against a blue screen, but it's so believable. And then that's followed up straight away by a shot of an eye of the operator of this machine staring into the bowels of this gadget, and you see his eye looking at Pertwee and Manning. It's, even by today's standards, it's so utterly believable, it's untrue. You then get one of the best monsters that the programme ever produced, a race of sort of meat-eating caterpillars called the Drashigs. A name which Robert Holmes quite gleefully pointed out in later years was an anagram of dish rags. They were done by puppetry. It's like glove puppets. And again, all done against a blue screen. But they are so utterly believable, they're genuinely terrifying. The roar that they have is a racing car as it's gone past, and the sound is slowed down. That's put on this screeching noise that they make. Fantastic story. It's basically just 4 episodes of just utter Doctor Who nonsense, but it's so good and so entertaining. It is the absolute standout story of this particular season. Season 10 for Doctor Who is very much a watershed time. Katie Manning, after 3 years, decided it was time to move on. But the real tragedy was that Roger Delgado, he filmed the episodes that he was contracted to film for this season of Doctor Who, and then he went to make a TV miniseries in Turkey, which was called the Tibetan Bellows. It was a co-production between French and German television. For the first time in his career, he was going to be doing a comedy. And on one day when he was being driven to the location, his car that he was being driven in was overturned into a ravine, and Delgado and 2 technicians were killed. Pertwee was a great friend of Roger Delgado, and his death affected him greatly, and in later years he would say it totally destroyed the pleasure he had in making Doctor Who. Barry Letts had decided that it was time for him to step down, and as the Doctor was going off into space more and more, unit were being used less and less frequently. And so Pertwee decided it was time for him to go at the end of the following year. This then gave a problem which the programme hadn't had for quite some time. It had enjoyed a period of 4 years of absolute solid stability. And very suddenly it was all change. And it wasn't helped by the fact that the new companion character, a wonderful character named Sarah Jane Smith, Pertwee had requested that he be involved in the casting process for this, and as it turned out, he hadn't been available to do so, and Barry Letts cast an actress named April Walker. And April Walker was contracted as Sarah Jane Smith for the whole of season 11. And then they had the read-through for the first serial in what was to become John Pertwee's final season. And she clashed very, very badly with John Pertwee. And Pertwee basically refused point blank to work with her. He said it's impossible, we just cannot work together. And so the character was recast, and Barry Letts was at a complete blank until the head of drama, a gentleman named Bill Slater, suggested to him he considered an actress named Elizabeth Sladen, who had worked for Bill Slater in 2 episodes of Z-Cars, playing 2 completely different characters, and you would have sworn blind it was 2 completely different people doing it. Barry Letts invited Elizabeth Sladen in to talk about a part in Doctor Who. Didn't tell her it was for the companion. And having spoken to her for a while, then said, if you'll hold on a second, I'll bring in John Pertwee so you can meet him. And Elizabeth Sladen remembered to the day she died when Pertwee walked in. He was wearing a denim jacket which was full of enamelled pin badges. And Barry Letts' office had a very large window right along one side of it, and when John Pertwee walked in the office, the sunlight hit all of these enamel pin badges, and it looked like explosions going off all over him. He introduces himself to Elizabeth Sladen, she introduces herself to John Pertwee. They sat there chatting in Barry Letts' office, and any time Elizabeth Sladen turned to face Barry Letts, John Pertwee was sat there going like this to Barry Letts. And any time she turned around to speak to John Pertwee, Barry Letts was sat there going like this to John Pertwee, at which point she was offered the role of Sarah Jane Smith. While it's interesting to wonder what it would have been like with April Walker playing the part, Elizabeth Sladen became, and is still for me, the best of all of the Doctor Who companions. No one comes close to the way she played the part. No one came close to her as a filler and a filter for the audience with the Doctor. She believed in the character so much, and as a character she proved so popular. She returned when the series was revived, and then ultimately got her own spin-off show as well, which was a wonderful success. That's something that'll be looked at again in later editions of the capsule. Barry Letts, however, also had the problem of finding a new Doctor Who, and his initial thought was that it should be a much older version, and so as he wrote a new companion character more able to handle the physical side, of a naval surgeon, Harry Sullivan, who was Unit's medical doctor, and cast Ian Marter in that role. And then with that in mind, of having this image of an older Doctor, he went and approached a very eccentric children's entertainer named Richard Hearn, who had been known through the 1950s and 1960s as a completely off-the-wall character named Mr. Pastry. Richard Hearn was basically just not interested in doing the thing at all. His next thought was Geoffrey Bayldon, who had been offered the part before William Hartnell, and again, when Hartnell was forced to give it up, Bayldon again refused to take the part on. Graham Crowden was very interested in doing it, until Barry Letts said to him that it would be a 3-year commitment at least, and Graham Crowden, being a Shakespearean actor and a regular with the National Theatre, said, well, in that case it's not for me, because if something came up at the National, I'd want to go and do that, so I can't really do Doctor Who. Jim Dale was very seriously considered until he had no interest in it. An actor who did, and who actually came very close to being cast until a very strange demand from him, was Michael Benton, who had become known and very famous as one of the Goons, and was also quite well known for Michael Benton's Potty Time. Very, very good actor, but he was very surreal, completely off the wall. And despite this, there was a thought that he was the absolute ideal Doctor Who. Unfortunately, Benton then said that I'd love to do it, but I could only do it if I was allowed to write the scripts. Which, there's absolutely no way you could do this, so it fell apart for him. Bennett Cribbs, who had appeared in one of the Doctor Who films in the 1960s, was asked if he'd be interested in it, and he genuinely wanted the role. But his vision of it was that it should be more like the Sweeney, and that the Doctor should be quite prepared to walk into a room and be quite happy to beat 7 bells out of the villain, which was completely against the ethos of the programme, so he was passed. The next actor that they considered was Fulton Mackay, and when he was spoken to, he came across as being again an absolute ideal character, for an ideal actor for it. He was quite keen to do it, and then Bill Slater approached Barry Letts and said to him, have you thought of this actor called Tom Baker? And Barry Letts confessed that no, he hadn't thought of Tom Baker because he'd never heard of Tom Baker. Baker had worked with Bill Slater on Plate for Today, and he came with a recommendation from Bill Slater, so Barry Letts agreed to see Tom Baker. And within 5 minutes of meeting him, thought, yeah, if he can act, he's the absolute ideal Doctor Who. So he said to Tom Baker, can you actually act? And Tom Baker said, well, judge for yourself. There's a film that I'm in the cinemas now called The Golden Voyage of Sinbad.
Okay.
When Baker said, like, I'm in this film, Barry Letts took the entire production team to the cinema to watch The Golden Voyage of Sinbad. And that afternoon phoned Tom Baker and asked him to be Doctor Who on a 3-year contract, which, as Tom Baker was working on a building site at the time, he grabbed at the chance. It foiled plans. Roger Delgado's absolutely tragic death foiled the plans that they had for what was going to be Pertwee's last story, and a huge twist in the relationship between the Doctor and the Master, where the two actors had worked this out between themselves that it was ridiculous how they constantly get each other to the point where they could finish each other off and then they'd stop. And the two of them just thought this was completely absurd, and so they came up with their own theory, which was going to be used in what was going to be Jon Pertwee's final story, where the Master would ally himself with some alien race with the intention of taking over the entire universe, only to be double-crossed towards the end of the story. And in order to save the whole of creation, joins forces with the Doctor, and then to defeat this huge alien menace, the Master was going to sacrifice himself to save the Doctor's life. And it will then be revealed that the Doctor and the Master were actually brothers. This went completely by the wayside, and with Delgado's death, Pertwee didn't want to work with anybody other than Roger Delgado as the Master. And so alternative plans were put in place for Pertwee's departure, which played on the fear of arachnophobia. And the story is about giant spiders from a planet called Netabilis 3, who have this absolutely horrendous act of jumping on people's backs and then taking over their minds. It's, if you're like me and you don't like spiders, it's not pleasant to watch, I tell you. It's really not very pleasant. But Pertwee, throughout the whole of his last year, became very distant, which was his way of divorcing himself from the programme. And on the day of the actual changeover into Tom Baker, unlike the only other time that the two actors had met in the studio, which was William Hartnell to Patrick Troughton, when they were quite warm towards each other, Pertwee was very, very frosty towards Tom Baker. Tom Baker's attitude was, I just want to get this done and then I want to take this over because this is my part now, this is my programme. He'd never watched Doctor Who with Jon Pertwee, he had no idea how hard he'd stamped on it. So the relationships between the two of them weren't the best, and there wasn't a very pleasant atmosphere in the studio on the day that they did this crossfade from Pertwee into Tom Baker. It's a very tragic end, really, for the Pertwee Doctor. He right the way through his life, he'd been very confident, very brave the whole way through, and at the very end he's broken. And again, you actually see the character die. And the process of changing from one body to another is given the name regeneration in this story. And the Doctor's mentor that was mentioned in the previous story that finished season 9 is introduced as a character in a Buddhist meditation centre which he's running, and it turns out that he is a Time Lord, and he, at the end of Pertwee's final story, saves the Doctor's life and accelerates the regeneration process, thus enabling the Doctor's body to renew. With Barry Letts departing the programme, his replacement was Philip Hinchcliffe. Terence Dicks stepped down as script editor to be replaced by Robert Holmes, and the programme forged on in an absolutely incredibly controversial manner, which it was superbly done, very successful. But for me, John Pertwee was my first Doctor. My very first memories of watching Doctor Who were with John Pertwee, and he was a wonderful supporter of the programme right the way up to his very, very sad death, which when he died it was met with disbelief by just about everybody. It seemed like he was going to go on and on forever. But you know, all good things come to an end, and the same thing happened with the third Doctor Who in 1974. Ironically enough, virtually 5 years to the exact day that it was announced that he was actually taking the part over. In the next edition of the capsule, we will be returning to the Sand and Sandals epics. We will be looking at Doctor Who again with the Tom Baker, well, certainly the first part of the Tom Baker years. If you have any comments on the Pertwee years, any thoughts, anything that you want us to look at, please leave comments on Facebook, on YouTube, or on the cloud. Please remember that all previous episodes of the capsule are available on YouTube. Please leave comments. Until then, this is Sean McKeon signing off.